Welcome back to another episode of The College. I'm your host, Jordan, and today I'm going to be talking with Olivia Pittard about what it's like to write a sophomore essay and what it's like to win the sophomore essay prize. So, Olivia, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think my greatest accomplishment is being enabled at the college. That's the greatest stamp of approval right there.
For sure. And just because I don't know who all is listening, could you just tell me quickly what is enablement?
Yes, enablement is this tricky thing that the college does where when you're a sophomore, you have to write a bigger and scarier paper than the one that you wrote for freshman year. And then you have an oral on it. And then all of your tutors get together and they decide if they want to keep you at the college or if they want to recommend that you leave the college. And very few people are ever disenabled. And even if you are disenabled, you can appeal to be re-enabled. But yeah, so it's like traditionally speaking, a very cut and dry process where not a lot of people are disenabled. It's more of a time where all of your tutors can get together and be like, yay, thumbs up, and then move on. And you can complete the second half of your St. John's education.
Yes,
but
that is wonderful.
It's definitely scary when you're writing your sophomore paper and you're like, it might just be me.
Yes.
It might just be me this time.
No, I do remember. But yeah, it shouldn't be a scary thing if you have been if you've been constantly, like, not constantly, let me just restart. If you like participate and you're active in your classes, I'm not saying every single day, but for majority, I feel like you have a very good chance of, I mean, not a very good chance, but a 99% chance that you're going to be enabled and you should not work. It's just for the people that may be struggling and, maybe this isn't the right fit, but they don't want to admit it to themselves and the college doesn't want to admit it to themselves. This is a good opportunity for the two to get together and be like, well, hey, we've seen that you're not performing to what we believe you could. And the student could either say, yes, I agree, or the student could say, no. There have been other circumstances that that have, been in my life.
Gotten in the way.
Yeah, that, I've been dealing with, but I feel like I'm fit to continue. So
it's a constructive thing, right? It's a constructive thing, not necessarily like they're not trying to like punish you.
Oh, for sure.
Because fit matters at the college, like it's a very weird program. So it's important that everybody understands what they're getting into. And sometimes sophomore year is the perfect year to be like, nope, this is not for me. Sophomore music, nope, no.
Yeah. So to get to that enablement, to get to your sophomore, your second Don Rag of sophomore year, so it's usually in the springtime, you have to, go through a lot of different classes, but also you have this one big thing called our annual essay. And I thought today would be a great opportunity to talk about that annual essay just because you wrote one that was acknowledged throughout the college by winning. You could probably tell me a little bit more. You won this essay prize. You want to mention what that's about?
Yeah, that was great. That felt great. That was crazy. I got the email from Mr. Carl Page at like 8:30 in the morning at like Denver time, where I was quarantining at the moment, and I was like, "You are not real right now. Like, you are kidding me." I was so thrilled, but it was jointly awarded to me and one other student who wrote about Augustine and time and the role of time in Augustine's Confessions, which is just such a cool concept. But so what happens is, in every one of your seminars, right, it's like about 20 of you all write a sophomore paper or really any annual paper, except for senior year because senior year is funky. But you write your paper, you turn it in, your two tutors get together, they read over all the papers, and then they select one to be sent to the prize committee. And apparently they selected mine from our class, and they sent it to the prize committee, and they can do all sorts of things. They can award it to one person, they can award it to no people, as they did with last year's junior class, which was wild and hotly debated, or they can give it to two people, which is what happened in my case, which was awesome because I really adore the other guy that won.
Yeah,
I'll try to remember, but he's just the best. So they get together, they send it to the prize committee, and the prize committee is chaired by Mr. Page, who is this wonderfully hardcore tutor. He does freshman seminar pretty much every year because he just loves it. He loves the Greeks. And he takes things like honor and glory very seriously. And so he's in some ways the perfect person to head the prize committee at St. John's. So they get together and then the prize committee debates over which essay should win. They hand it out. And then typically at graduation, you get like an honorable mention. All of the prize awardees get an honorable mention, and that's that. And then your essay is stored in the college library. I still think that I have not submitted the form that says that they can do that, so I don't think mine is there, but I will get that squared away. And so when you bring all your little chitlins to St. John's years in the future, you can be like, look, mommy won a prize one time. It was really cool. And they will not care at all. But it was a really, really special moment.
Yeah,
For
they might
sure.
be more interested in like the statues or whatever that's in
Right.
the library.
Right.
Like, who is this
Anything but
man?
the library.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's funny. Yeah, so writing in general has been a tough thing for me. And I
Yeah.
feel like I've heard through my peers that many would prefer to take an exam over writing
Yeah.
because writing takes a lot of effort. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying people aren't willing to put in that effort, but it's also like you're putting a little bit of yourself out there. And sometimes people aren't very comfortable, but that's all we do here.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to talk about, well, what did you write on and how was that process for you? Did you have not a proctor? Did you have like what, goodness, what are they called?
Essay advisor.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. Those great questions all around. I think the writing is the hardest part of the St. John's curriculum for sure. I think the amount of writing that's demanded of you is really difficult. I think, you're probably dealing with a paper every 2 weeks would be my best estimate just throughout the semester. But there's something about it that, at least for me, it's not an easy process. Like I know people, I had a friend who was a senior, she graduated, and she could just like sit down and write a fluid 5 pages for any topic, and then it would just be done. And like I trust her, she's really smart, I'm sure that they're wonderful, but like that methodology does not work for me in the slightest. So typically what'll happen is your language tutors will give you, it's honestly writing practice. I think it's writing practice so that they can help you get better. They can give you like a critique of what you're doing, and they'll let you write on anything that you're reading in seminar at the moment. And so Mr. Amidi was my seminar tutor, or was my sophomore language tutor last year, and I wrote a paper on Genesis for him. And I just loved Genesis. I just thought it was the coolest thing, right? We read it for the first time. That was the first reading of sophomore year. And I was not raised religious. I was definitely familiar with the story of Adam and Eve, but at the same time, reading it in the context of seminar, it hit very differently. And I think everybody will say that about some book that they've read before or some story that they've read before. Things just hit differently at school. When you're in a room of your peers and you're all talking about it late at night. But Adam and Eve, their relationship and the tragedy of the fall really resonated with me at that time. I was particularly interested in the question of nakedness and why they were naked, right? I was thinking like, right, they eat from the tree of good and evil and they take a bite, both of them do. And the first thing that they realize is that they're naked. They open their eyes and they realize that they're naked. And I just thought of all of the possible things that are good and evil in this world. What a strange thing for them to first like realize. It didn't make sense to me why that would be the first knowledge that they kind of became privy to. And so that initial paper for Mr. Amidi and then the following expanded sophomore paper was really an exploration of how does it make sense that this is like the origin story of humans, right? How does this make sense as a genesis for like humankind? What are we supposed to understand about romantic relationships or intimate relationships as a result of this? How does the fall change romantic relationships? Yeah, and how do you deal with like the distance between the two of you, right? Between two people who clearly love each other a lot. Because I think the thing that struck me the most about Adam and Eve was the fact that beforehand they really seemed like a unit. Before they ate from the tree, they seemed like a unit, right? Eve was crafted from Adam's rib, and they were just so happy to get like, I mean, and Paradise Lost like totally fills out a lot of this, and I'd never read that before, and so reading that this year was just a total trip in and of itself. But there was such a contentedness before that, right? And then they eat and they realize that they're naked and then they cover themselves. And there's this strange line where beforehand, before Eve is tempted by the serpent, it says that they were in the garden, they were naked and they were unashamed, which seems almost like foreshadowing to me, right? And that was one of the things that was kind of the impetus for the essay. I was like, this is such an interesting thing to focus on as the author of Genesis, right? Like they were naked and they were unashamed, as if it's like an inside joke with the rest of us. We're like, oh no, they should have been ashamed. Like we know better. Like they should have been
Hmm.
shameful. And I just thought that that kind of storytelling is also really interesting. So the exploration of what happens to their relationship upon realizing that they're naked was a whole other thing, right? Because they were ashamed. That, you know, we can kind of infer that they were ashamed afterwards because they wanted to cover themselves. But what was weird to me about that was I didn't understand who they were ashamed before, or who they were like ashamed to be seen by. Because out of everybody in the world, you would think that your spouse would be the person that you would be least ashamed to be naked in front of. Which led to all sorts of questions about like, well, what was the status of sexuality before the fall, and how does sexuality change as a result of it as well? Because again, like it just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, out of everybody, like you should be okay. You shouldn't feel weird to be naked in front of them. And so then I played around with ideas of being ashamed to be naked before God, whether or not there was some kind of like, and this is only like a little throwaway paragraph, but it was just, I just wanted to jab some traditionalists a little bit, but I was like, I kind of entertained the idea of what if God was walking naked in the garden as well? Just because, you know, he's given a physical form and it doesn't really make sense why he would be wearing clothing. But that was a whole other little detour. But yeah, I mean, the entire thing was just the way that I write papers is I need a very legitimate question that I have no idea how to answer. Because the papers that I write where it's like I kind of know where I'm going from the beginning end up being the most boring ones, and they're typically lab papers, right? Because like I need to kind of know what's happening in lab before I can even kind of sit down to write a paper. But for something as exploratory as like, I don't know, a literary or psychological analysis of Genesis, like you've got to be kind of open-ended with that. And I think open-ended questions, we talk a lot about that at St. John's and their importance, but I think they also end up leading to the best essays in some ways, because there are so many different ways to take the question. So
Definitely.
half my paper is like kind of just ruling out possibilities.
Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that you said that caught my attention was you initially wrote this for your language tutor and
Mhm.
then you expanded on that for your annual essay. But
Yeah.
it sounded like the essay that you turned in with your language tutor didn't come to anything definite, didn't come to any conclusions. You were
Yeah.
just, it's purely just an exploration or an
Hmm.
investigation or
Yeah.
like a treatise or something, right? Like
Right.
it's an open-ended kind of, you're leaving it there, or you're putting something on the table for you
Hmm.
ultimately to learn from someone else because you're probably going to be talking about it with them.
Yeah.
And then even in your annual essay, it sounded like maybe you didn't come to anything like specifically like you didn't come to any like one specific thing that you're like, you know what, this
Yeah.
is like this is nudity in Genesis. This is
Yeah.
like what it means.
It's
I
certainly
think
not like a thesis, you know?
right. Yes.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted you to entertain the idea of like why do you think we do something like that? Is it
Hmm.
uh because I'm thinking of, you know, high school and then maybe
Yeah.
in other places you're kind of taught, you're say, okay, have your thesis, have some supporting some supporting facts,
Hmm.
give us a conclusion,
Hmm.
and then that'll be your essay. And that
Yeah.
does seem like a little bit more like those lab papers you were talking about where
Hmm.
you already know where you're excuse me, you already know
Yeah.
where you're going to go when you start.
Yeah.
But there's something really fun, there's something really um like exciting when you don't know where you're going to end up, because it seems
Hmm.
like it's to me at least, it's you're wrestling, you're talking, you're engaging with the author that you're reading, and then
Yeah.
you're coming to understand what they're saying, but also taking in some things that, like, based off of your own prejudices
Right.
of being your own type of, like, being your own person. So
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting.
Yeah. I think it's not easy for me to like glom onto any given open question, right? It's not like I can just be like, oh yeah, I'm really passionate about that. Let me explore that and like do a really thorough but open-ended investigation. Like I think that part of the reason that this question, right, like what is nakedness to them, what is like vulnerability between these two people, part of the reason that was so important to me was because it has a lot of personal like weight in my life, right? Like a big question for me is like how is it possible for two people to stay together, right? Like I mean, frankly, my parents got divorced right before sophomore year. Like this was just on my mind, you know. I was really because I'm a believer that monogamy is possible. I'm a believer that like relationships can endure. Um, but at the same time, I thought that Adam and Eve were a really wonderful case, and like, yeah, okay, well they stay together, right? Right. It's like, okay, they stay together, but like clearly there's so much drama that happens in their relationship. And it was such an interesting question to kind of like just explore their relationship with the sparse details. That was another thing that was really helpful, was that I chose I always like to write on things that are small passages, because I feel like if I do, like, I could never write on something like Middlemarch. I say that now, watch me write on Middlemarch for this year, but like I could never write on something that's like huge, because I am a very detail oriented person when it comes to writing papers. Like I like to take you like sentence by sentence. And I think Genesis is like uniquely awesome for that. Um, because every sentence is kind of illuminating in some way, and also just like kind of like totally perplexing. So I think it helps to have something small that you're dealing with, like a little kind of self-contained thing that you're dealing with. Um, but also sparseness really helps too, because it's not like, yeah, I mean, I guess I keep coming back to Milton. It's not like something like Milton where it's like there's so much explanation, right? There's so much color in all of his writing. Like there's so much detail in every single sentence. Like there's not. Like the verbal exchange between Adam and Eve, when Eve convinces Adam to eat the fruit or gives him the fruit, is just not there in Genesis. And I think it's really interesting to think of like what they're leaving out, especially in this particular passage, right? The things that they choose to include and the things that they don't. Um, but that was something that was also really helpful, was that it was by definition, like just at the outset of the project, it was very imaginative. Like I just, because it had to be, like there's no way, like there was only so much source material that I was going to actually get from the writing itself. Like a lot of it was just kind of trying to like make connections or theorize about different things, which is nice, because I felt like it was a text that like really lent itself to like the kind of paper that I like to do, which is a little bit more imaginative than like the standard, like, I don't know, your standard high school paper. But I think in trying to keep an open-ended, like the importance of trying to write these papers is I think you learn a lot about, it sounds so silly and like classic St. John's. I think you learn a lot about yourself in doing that, right? Like not only was the actual process of writing it really demanding and scary, like, but at the same time, as long as you're picking questions that really matter to you, I think you're going to have a really difficult time saying that you come to a conclusive answer. You know what I mean? Like as long as if you're actually picking a question that's like really important to you, it's not going to be easy to be like, oh, check, solved it. Like, and I think that's why you see so much exploration, open-ended exploration in senior papers as well, because I think seniors really they try to choose something that like represents or like synthesizes something about their St. John's experience, or something about what they, one of the big questions that they have about life. And I love figuring out what people are writing about for their senior essays, because you're like, wow, like that makes a lot of sense. Like 99% of the time you're like, wow, should have called it. Like that's amazing.
Mhm.
And I think that as long as you really spend a lot of time before you pick your question, if you pick the right question for yourself, you're going to write an awesome essay.
Yeah,
I think that's a big takeaway for me.
for sure. I really like, you said along the lines like you learn a little bit something about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I always kind of mention that as like what we kind of do here is you kind of investigate you. And I kind of wanted to talk about these questions because I feel like they're very, and I don't know how else to put it.
Mm-hmm.
The best way I've thought so far is like they're very human questions that
Yeah.
we try to ask. And
Yeah.
I feel like they're in those, specific details that we can gather these,
Mm-hmm.
gather gather the information to tackle those big questions of like,
Yeah.
what does it mean to love or something like that,
Yeah.
right? And I've had the pleasure of having Mr. Drucker this year for a seminar, and he always will ask you something about yourself.
Yeah.
Like, goodness, I believe it was like, I'm forgetting the text, but
Yeah.
he asked the question of like, what does this mean to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said, what can this do for you? And I think it
Mm-hmm.
was maybe Pascal's Pensée.
Oh
Um,
God, that
so
one's a
it was
killer.
something, yeah, it was something in there. And he was like, what does this do for you? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, like that stuck with me because now all of a sudden I have to think about myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, who am I? I'm just some 19, 20-year-old kid sitting down talking about some great
Yeah.
book that's been talked about for
I'm
hundreds,
just a
if not
read.
thousands. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? And I think what that does is it opens you up to think about not only like
Yeah.
you, but the collective group that you're sitting with, and it makes you ask those types of questions of like,
Hmm.
we're reading these books for hopefully some sort of not only like fulfillment, like enjoyment
Yeah,
kind of thing, but there is also learning happening. And
for sure.
when you read, I mean, we just finished Middlemarch,
Hmm.
and a lot of that is very psychological. Like we're talking about different relationships in throughout the book and
Yeah.
like the drama that happens. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but um we can apply that to our life.
Yeah.
I mean, St. John's is so small. People know
Yeah.
people.
It's Middlemarch.
Yes.
I don't know why anybody didn't bring that up in class. I was so tempted. I was like, we literally are in Middlemarch. Like we live there.
Yes. And a
But
40-acre campus tucked in
like,
downtown Annapolis.
yeah, Princess to Club. Like it was hysterical. We were in class, we were talking about Princess to Club, and it's like a courtly drama. It's like pre Pride and Prejudice era, whatnot. It's like really, really bougie France, right? Just to put it very simply, really bougie France. It's just the court. And people are like, "Oh my God, can you believe that like relationships are in such disarray? Like, oh my gosh, like what is the difference between a husband and a lover? Why does everybody have a lover?" And I'm like, guys, like it's St. John's. Like, I don't know how you don't understand this. Like, it's like it is so clearly like we go here. Um, and I think it's weird. Like that was always the thing that pissed me off the most when I was a freshman. I was like, why does nobody see it? Like, especially reading things like ethics, right? It's like it is legitimately a how-to. Like in so many ways, it is a how-to for exactly the period of life that we're in right now. And I'm not saying being a young adult is easy or anything like that, but at the same time, like there are some such like beautifully elegant ideas, especially freshman year too. And it just killed me that I was like, why aren't we applying these things? Like, and I can say that for myself too. And I think it takes a little bit to kind of realize that like the stuff that we're reading really does have bearing on our own lives. But I think there's no advantage gained in like distancing yourself from the text. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like some people do St. John's kind of holding the books out like at an arm's distance. Especially sophomore year, right? Like if you're not letting the sophomore year books, I mean, we were in seminar together, right? Like
Mhm.
sophomore year, like those books kill you. Like they're like cutting to the quick. And I honestly it was one of our Augustine seminars. I think it was a second one, and I just like silent sobbed at the table. Like just like it was so sad. My boyfriend joked with me that I was having a Catholic conversion moment beforehand, and he was like, "This is not allowed." But like I just think that really giving yourself over to the books to the point where you can really be like affected by them, like you got to get your money's worth. Like it really comes down to that. Like I don't know how many tutors have told all of us, right? Like you get out as much as you put in at St. John's. Like it's just that way, right? There is no exam. There's no exam. There are papers. And I think as much as you're willing to give yourself over to the project, like that's how much that you're going to get back.
Yeah.
But it's hard. I'm not saying it's not hard. Like seriously, sophomore year was devastating.
Yeah.
Even Pascal was like a throwback to that, like kind of like gut punch, gut punch feeling of seminar every time. But
Yeah.
it's definitely worthwhile.
I completely understand, and it's what I find what I found about my time here is just you said it perfectly. You got to open yourself up to these books. You have to allow it to like you have to allow yourself to connect to it in sort of a
Hmm.
way. And of course, it's not going to be exact. The things that they're talking about, the common culture isn't
Yeah,
going to be exact, but you can go out once you're done your 2 hours at that seminar table. You can
yeah,
walk out or you can log out. And if you just go walk down the street, if you just go walk somewhere, right? I'm
yeah,
not, I mean, down the street is subjective. If you have no one there, then no
yeah,
one's there. But like if here in Annapolis, you go walk down the street, you're gonna enter like you'll see other people. You can
yeah,
apply the types of things that you're reading
yeah,
about, and you can. I mean, those books are just the beginning.
yeah,
Some sort of experience must happen as well to fully take away what's. I mean,
yeah,
not fully take away, but like you just learn more. And I think that's
yeah,
one of the wonders of St. John's is like when you read these books but also you have 4 years of experience and who knows 18 years beforehand uh, to like under your belt to where you know what you can draw on those experiences, tie it
yeah,
to these books and be like, yes, I see what Descartes, I see what Pascal, I see what
yeah,
I don't know, pick an author. They're
Yeah,
probably talking about something that's really like fundamentally within you, within me, within everyone
right.
that's reading these texts.
And I don't know. I've had a lot of really funny conversations with Mr. Goo about this. But he was talking about how when he came to the college, he was like, and he finally got through the entire program, right? Like he did the entire thing. And he got to the end and he was like, what? Like just reading these books won't automatically make me a better person? Like that's crazy. Like I thought that was the deal. And he felt like robbed. He was like, wait, hold on. There's more than just reading it. And of course, all of this is like, he's joking. But at the same time, I really do feel like that sometimes. Like I'll read it and I'll be like, am I a different person now? Like, do I suddenly have discipline? Like, especially after reading things like ethics. But like, I think one of the things that's so beautiful about a lot of these texts is they give you such beautiful ways of thinking about improving yourself. Like, I think that's something that's really difficult. As somebody like this might not be a good thing to reveal on the St. John's podcast, but I did not think about virtue before I got to St. John's. Like, I did not think about like, oh, the big V question. And like freshman year, like that is the question, like what is virtue? What is goodness? And I was very like political sciences oriented. So I thought about things like justice, I guess. And I like in the grand scheme of things and about structure and
Mm.
government and ruling and things like that. But at the same time, I was never concerned with like, am I achieving my ultimate good? Right. Or whatever vague notion. Like, there's plenty of that stuff in all of these books. Um, And it felt like when I got here, I was like, oh my God, like people are unironically saying soul right now. Like this is hard for me to do. Like I think it's difficult for everybody to get into it, right? Like at least it was for me because I like had to like stop from giggling every time somebody said soul in a lab class. Like a lab class was especially, I was like, oh my Lord, what are we talking about right now? Um, but I think I got over it, right? It's like, okay, soul is a stand-in for whatever that animating force is, right? Like it's like and you don't have to you just kind of move past like these prejudices about like these ideas that we engage with here. Like where if you don't go to St. John's, it's like it's so easy to roll your eyes. Like, right? It's so easy to roll your eyes about this stuff. But again, like you said, like a lot of it's just like custom from another age, right? Like it's like there's vocabulary from ages that are not this one. But at the same time, like Aristotle talking about habit and the importance of habit in becoming a better person. Like that is everybody still talks about that, right? It's like just start by doing like one good thing a day, right? Like that's a really dumbed down way of saying like you're not going to get anywhere unless you start acting the way that you want to, right?
Yeah.
And I think if we did a better job of like untangling kind of like the lessons that are like I don't know, trapped away in this like in these sometimes like really arcane books, like we would get a lot of good out of it. But I
Hmm.
think that's part of what seminar does.
And I mean, I'm not trying to, I think essays fall
Hmm.
perfect to what we're talking about because
Yeah.
how I've viewed essays currently is like it's something that I'm interested in. I can
Hmm.
take it, I can sit down, and I have a little bit more time than I normally would. And
Yeah.
what happens when I have more time is I go in those little details. Maybe I
Hmm.
take a specific passage word by word and I unpack what that means, or
Hmm.
I try to understand not what it means, but I try to untangle the terminology to whoever the author
Yeah.
is. Like what
Yeah.
was he or she trying to say? And I think when you do that, there's something really rewarding that comes out of it. And
Oh yeah.
I think that's where that, I don't know. And I wonder, maybe this is a question to you. Like, do
Hmm.
you think that is where that kind of like self-discovery, self-understanding comes from? Because
Hmm.
I've written not many essays, but I've written a couple, and every
Hmm.
time I've finished them, I'm like, oh, huh, you know, even with
Yeah.
Euclid, I'm like, okay, I understand. I think I understand this proposition just a little bit more.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think we like what I wrote on was more literary. I would say like I took a more like literary bent on it than say like a theological or even a philosophical one. Right. Of course, you have to touch on all of that when you're writing on something like Genesis. But at the same time, that's not to say that even when you're writing on, like, I would say even when you're writing on things that aren't literary, you can absolutely still learn something about yourself, right? Like, and I think a lot of that comes from the essay writing process, especially considering the way that I would say math papers are a good example, right? Like everybody, math papers are some of the most divisive things at St. John's, I think, because there are some people who are like, oh my gosh, like, yes, give me a math paper any day of the week. I will just bang that out for you. And there are other people who are like, no, like, absolutely not. Like, I hate math papers. I will try as hard as I can to not actually write about what's like this prop or whatever it is, because they're really different. Like, they're really difficult. And I think that goes to show like the different areas of difficulty that people have with different classes goes to show like how different, how individualized everybody's learning is at St. John's, right? Like people write entirely different types of essays depending on what they're kind of getting out of something. And I knew about this one assignment. It was a few years before our time, but it was a math class, right? And it was sophomore year, so they're doing astronomy and things like that. And you know how Ptolemy has that whole like, you know, the planet's location chart pretty much, where it's like it's got all of like the different oh my god, epicycles and whatnot, and like the dates and stuff. So the task was to create your own planet and pretty much redo the entire calculations according with your own planet, which to me sounds like a total headache, but also like kind of cool. Like, oh dang, like
Sure.
that would be awesome. And some people like chose dates that were like in line with like their siblings' birthdays and things like cute like that, right? Where it's like, but it's still a challenge and it's crazy and it's like a very St. John's assignment. And some people like slaved over the math. Like they were like, it was like took them hours and hours and hours, right? Like kind of an unconventional paper, but like also mind numbing in the same way that papers can kind of be, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm getting nowhere. And then you finally have a breakthrough and it's done and it feels awesome. Which is pretty much the trajectory of every paper that I've ever had. It's like question, roadblock, delete half of it, write again, and then it's done and you feel wonderful. But then the other half of the class, they wrote about like this fictionalized planet and like what life was like on this fictionalized planet. And it was a math paper. And I know that the people who did all the math were like so pissed. They were like, that is not a math paper. Like, you get out of here. Like, that is not okay. But at the same time, like, both were well received by the tutor. Like, both versions were well received by the tutor. And like, I think that speaks to the fact that like there really is not a single way to do a paper at St. John's. Like, I honestly thought that the paper that I wrote last year was a little bit too contemporary for what I thought St. John's papers were, or a little bit too like spunky. Like, I don't know. I felt like I was a little punchy for like what a St. John's paper should be, but at the same
Mhm.
time, like you just really never know. Like, I think it's more about, yeah, I don't know. I think it's more about being earnest and your questioning than the way that you do it. I think that's something that's really liberating because I know that freshmen show up and they're like, how on earth do I write a St. John's paper?
Mhm.
And it's definitely
I
not
don't
the 5 paragraph format, but it's like
know,
you can kind of weasel your way into figuring out like your own style, you
for
know?
sure. I mean, I think one of the first essays I was assigned was a math essay, and I was like, I have no idea how to write
Yeah,
one.
right.
Like, what do you want? You want me to write about like book one of
Euclid?
Euclid? Like what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what? Like what do you want me to do? So I like not
Exactly.
that I knew what to do, but I just kind of explored a
Yeah.
specific prop. Like I just went through the like the explanation that Euclid gives, and I just
Yeah.
kind of not agree or disagree. But I'm just like, yeah,
Yeah.
it works,
It
and here's
doesn't.
how it works. Um, but yeah, like I really don't know what to say about I don't know what to say about essays other than like if you are, I think, like you said, earnest with with the thing itself, like some wonderful things can happen.
Yeah.
And that isn't, I really don't like when I say like, oh, wonderful things, like magical things, like all these. It's like that's not really like, yeah, it's wonderful, but also people could be like, well, it's useless. But I really I
Yeah.
disagree because
Yeah.
when you can take something that you have no idea,
Yeah.
absolutely no idea what you're talking about, and you could
Hmm.
come and just say something, you're not saying anything definitive, but
Hmm.
you're taking something away, but also you're adding something to it.
Yeah.
Um, that that sounds, I mean, I feel like you can apply that in many aspects of life. And it gives you a
Yeah.
different way of thinking about how to solve, not even solve, but how to, I don't know, I guess solve an
Hmm.
issue, a top, like whatever,
Yeah.
a problem. I don't know. I really don't.
No, I think that's a wonderful way to put it because, in some ways, I guess I use the word earnest because um it feels like kind of a joke, like the classic joke at St. John's, like, oh, I don't know how to end my paper. I know, just ask another question. like right, like that is the way. Or like I spent the entire paper just getting to the point where I actually figured out the question that I actually wanted to ask. And I think that's part of what being an earnest question asker is at St. John's. It's like really making sure that you're kind of parsing out what exactly it is that you want to know, right? Because actually, it really, this is also kind of controversial. It really pisses me off, like on the in like the school advertising stuff, that it's always like, what is justice? What is love? Like, what is bestness or whatever, right? Like, it's like it annoys me because in some ways, like those no, those are the most elusive questions, right? Like those are clearly the most elusive questions. And you spend all of freshman year realizing that it's like, we really can't answer them, right? Like we cannot attack those larger ones head on. And so I think there's a lot of deflection that happens at St. John's in class, right? Like I think everyone who goes here would say that sometimes we'll get to a place where either it gets really, really technical, or it gets just to something that people just aren't interested in. And then somebody will be like, oh, but like, what? And then something really, like they'll ask like a really broad question that doesn't necessarily deal with like the specifics of what we're working with here, but it kind of like zooms you far out. Um, and I think that is important. Like I think asking larger framework questions is important about certain things. But at the same time, I think the smaller questions, like the more bite-sized questions, are where each of us as individuals can really get the most out of it. Just because I think it really lets you, like, again, like, how am I going to write a stupid paper on what is love? Like, I'm not going to write you a 5-page paper on what is love, like even with reference to any of these texts. Like, it's just too big. Like, that's like a 50-page paper. Like, and that would like even like that wouldn't even kind of start to like scratch the surface. And so I
That's
think,
no paper, that's a book.
right, that's a book, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think like chopping down these questions, or finding the smaller question that gets at the larger thing, where it ends up like kind of leading you to it, and it's like, and this falls in blank arena in this larger question. Like, just orienting yourself and orienting your confusion within the broader questions is a triumph in and of itself. um and I think that we don't like, that doesn't get advertised enough, right? Like, just realizing where your confusion is a huge part
Oh
of essay
yeah.
writing.
Oh
Like
yes.
being like, I don't even know what to do, right? Like Ptolemy papers, right? Like Ptolemy papers are so hard, everyone struggles with those. And at the beginning, you've done this entire thing, right? You're learning about how the sky sees the planets, and it's crazy. There are loop-de-loops, there's math that goes along with it, it's kind of geometry, it's kind of observation. And it feels like a success just to be able to say something, even like just about why you're confused, or
Hmm.
like why this doesn't make sense. And I think that's something that essays can be really, really helpful in. They can just kind of help orient you in terms of, what do I know, what do I not know. And I think if you're able to say more accurately what it is that you don't know with reference to something that you're reading, uh, that feels like a win to me. That
Oh
feels
yeah.
like a win in my book, you know?
Oh yeah. I've definitely heard, and I agree with what you say. I
Mhm.
think along like a similar vein, like you must break down these large questions because of
Yeah.
course you don't know where to start when you ask what is love. I made
Yeah.
that mistake my freshman year when I wrote on symposium. I try to answer what is love, right?
So hard.
You can't, like, it's
You can't.
my essay, although I'd say it was a freshman essay. You
Yeah.
must learn for yourself that those types of questions are much
Yeah.
harder to ask when you just openly say, what is love? But
Yeah.
if you try to break down it in piece by say,
Yeah.
I don't know, go through an argument that Aristophanes says, or
Yeah.
whoever else in, or Diotima or whoever in the symposium, if you follow along and you could say, well, wait a second, this one thing that they said doesn't
Mhm.
really make sense to their explanation of what love is. And
Mhm.
I'm not really understanding. Let me go and explore that. I think then you could come and say, you could like come to the conclusion, or you could come to an understanding like, okay, maybe that is love.
Yeah.
Maybe that isn't. Again, I don't know, but I can tell you that
Yeah.
this specific part is important to the whole. And I
That's
just think
wonderful.
that's,
I like that.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's part of our time here, because like I think 4 years, I think us students are the ones that, let me put it, I think tutors are the ones that really reap the benefits because they're there for more than 4 years,
Yeah,
right? They get to
they're
tackle
in
them.
it.
Yeah, they could come back every 4 years to the same book, or they could come back every 2 years or every year. Like you said, Mr.
Yeah,
Page will do freshman year seminar because he
yeah,
loves the Greeks.
yeah. And
We,
he's such a badass that they're like, you can have whatever you want.
yes, but we
Yeah,
must continue to,
yeah.
if we don't understand something in ethics, we still have to go to physics.
Yeah,
We don't understand
exactly.
anything in
We're
physics, we
still
got to
doing
go to
metaphysics.
metaphysics. Yep.
Yeah,
We just
exactly.
have to continue. But it
Oh,
really does. I think another wonder of this type of education is, and I don't, let me preface this by saying I don't think this is the only place that you can do it. I've had
agreed.
many discussions where other people from other schools find a similar kind of spark and they find their own way of going about it.
Hmm.
But here, this is the education that I know. I
Hmm.
think, and I'm an advocate for buying books, mainly for the reason that it gives you a lifetime worth
Yeah,
of I don't like a lifetime worth of curiosity, right? Like you can
yeah,
ask these big questions. You could sit down with someone, especially Johnny's. Like we're all pretty similar in the way that, I mean, we all share a common kind of like
yes.
interest, and that
Which
is,
is so rare. Like that
yes,
cannot be overstated. Like how
yes,
awesome it is. Like that is why I came to St. John's. Like
hmm,
honestly, in a nutshell, like that is why. Because I was in high school and I was like, why don't you people care about all this stuff? Like, why don't you care about this? Like, I'm so interested in this. It is amazing. Like, how do you not give a crap about your like, what you're learning about? Like, why are you in
hmm,
all of these classes if you just want the you just want the honors credit? Like, come on. Like there has to be a better reason for wanting to take a certain class. And that's what I was so excited about with St. John's. And that's because everybody shows up for the exact same curriculum. And that is such a radical and strange thing to be doing these days,
hmm,
but it's so awesome. Like showing up and being able to make conversation with anybody on campus because they've already like all of them, all the older people, they've already read what you're reading. And it's like a blast in the past. And they're like, oh my God, you guys are in symposium. I remember when I was on symposium. Like that's crazy. And like that in and of itself is just it creates such an interesting community. Like it allows you to really feel like you guys are doing something collaboratively. And I think that's really, really like I cherish that, especially considering what we're doing every time in seminar.
hmm.
You got to feel like you're all kind of on the same team.
No, for
Um,
sure.
but I think that's what's awesome. But I mean, honestly, something that you said earlier really makes me think of another reason that essay writing is really important at St. John's. And I think that's because we kind of move at like a breakneck pace, right? Right? Like all of a sudden it's like ethics, okay, physics, okay, metaphysics, and then it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're done with Aristotle. And you're like, whoa, geez, that was crazy. And by no means are you expected to become an expert in this, nor does even writing a paper about something allow you to become an expert in any of the things that we read. But
Hmm.
writing a paper about a specific text is awesome because you actually get to spend time with it. And you really get to like take your time with it in a way that I don't think that you get to every Monday or Thursday in seminar. Um, and so in some ways, essays are awesome in the same way that precept is, right? Because you get to break it down and pick what you want to write about, pick what you want to read about, and actually spend like the proper amount of time with a book. But essays are awesome. Learn a lot.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And like even you might you might come to St. John's with one idea. You're there for the first 5 months, you're there for the first 4 months, whatever. You're there for some
Yeah.
time and you realize, oh snap, St. John's is a little bit different than what I expected. But then maybe it's like it turns out well in the end because all of a
Hmm.
sudden, yes, you wanted to come here because you want to understand what virtue,
Hmm.
what love, what justice, like what all these big questions are. But then you come to understand that, and this is exactly like what I found myself to
Yeah.
be doing is like, no, I can't ask those big questions. Let me take a second. Let me understand where my confusion is because there are a lot of roadblocks getting to that
Hmm.
question. And you must take your time. There is no rush. And the thing about
Yeah.
St. John's is you learn that, oh no, I am being rushed. But let me take a second in precept in an essay
Yeah.
and work out what I'm confused about.
Yeah.
When you do that, wonderful things. I mean, you have the
Yeah.
possibility that wonderful things can happen.
It's the best. And it makes me think of Miss LaSalle gave really amusing advice for how to write an essay at St. John's. I mean, every tutor has their little like trick to tell students to put them at ease, but this was freshman lab, and she said that when you're writing a paper, try to think of taking the highlights of a dinner party conversation about your question, right? You have your question. Now imagine that your question was taken up at a dinner party, and there are going to be some really interesting things said and also some kind of not so interesting things said. And what your job is like to kind of have a conversation with yourself about your question, imitating the dinner party and just picking out the highlight reel. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really interesting way to do it, right? Because it's like it also acknowledges that even in your essay, you're only getting a fraction of what can actually be said about what you're like what you're asking about. Um, but part of the beauty of actually writing a good essay is realizing like what belongs and what doesn't. And
Mhm.
that's something that's really difficult for me, as you can imagine, simply from listening to this podcast so far. I'm kind of all over the place. I will jump all over the place, and it's difficult because when it comes to writing a paper, I have to be really super disciplined about the flow of questions, right? Like, okay, does this question naturally follow from the one prior? Or actually, does this belong way, way, way up above or way, way, way down below? And I think everyone kind of comes to figuring out what their structure for longer papers should be. But I am somebody who needs an outline. Like, I just need, even if it's like as simple as like check boxes, and I have to address this before I can address this, before I can address that. Um, I think that's something that can be really difficult at St. John's when, especially freshman year, they're like, "Oh, give me your stream of consciousness," right? And it's like, no, like at the end of the day, like you giving a stream of consciousness about the magnolia tree is not going to actually be a good essay, like even a good St. John's essay, because there's no inserted structure. And I think they do that as an exercise to get you to like be less self-conscious in your writing, because I think that's the first hurdle in being able to write a St. John's paper is like you got to drop the like, oh my gosh, this has to look a certain way. It has to be this kind of like font. It has to be this kind, like nobody cares. Like I have never once gotten a comment from a tutor about the format of a paper, right? So like you have to kind of weed out all of that weird high school stuff. But then once you do that, I think it's kind of, it's really fun to see how people then end up personalizing their style, um, by way of like the way that they write, whether it's like
Mhm.
chronological or topical. But I love reading other people's St. John's papers.
No,
Blows my
yeah.
mind. I'm like, I could have never written that paper, but that was amazing. Like, I don't even know how you did that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation. That's kind of those were my questions. I
Mhm.
didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to say, any insights to anyone, graduates
Mm,
or prospies or any.
Prospies, I think you should come to the school. If you understand if you've looked at the program and you're like, wow, this is awesome. These are all books that I want to read before I die. Just don't hesitate. Just come to St. John's, because it's better to read them at the beginning of your life than at the end of your life.
Oh yeah,
Um, it's always, I think end of the life reading is good for rereading things, but these are books that I think I will be really, really happy to have read when I did. So if there's any doubt, just go ahead and do it.
for sure,
I
for
think
sure.
that's the last thing I'll say.
I really appreciate you taking the time. That's all for this episode of the podcast. Coming soon is a conversation with a recent graduate, Eric Baker.